Good morning everyone, Tater here, welcome to Tater Games. Today we're talking about the awesomeness that we just made for this week's Game Jam, which had a theme of blah blah blah. The theme of the Game Jam was making a rage game similar to Getting Over It, or using Getting Over It as your inspiration. I'm not the police, as I'll say for the 15th time, so it didn't really matter what you guys made, as long as you guys had fun and made something very cool. The Game Jam ends right now, unfortunately. This means pack up your belongings and get out of my house. So from now on you want to get your friends, you want to go grab some votes for your game and all that lovely stuff. And of course, for those here who are watching this for some other reason, for example, you want to learn how to make a game similar to Getting Over It, well, I've got all the ingredients right here for you. We shall start. First things first, we want to get our program of choice. I've chosen Unity as per usual. I just love Unity. Unity's great. Unity has many flaws, but Unity is good for beginners especially, and for me, because I like it. And of course we're going to start a new project, but you guys aren't here for this. This is very basic stuff. We want to get straight into the game. Of course, in the Game Jam, I actually allowed everybody to use assets for the first time, seeing as Getting Over It was actually a B game, and in Getting Over It, he actually describes the game as a B game and what a B game really is, which is basically made up of trash. Obviously not some trashy assets, just assets that he finds that people don't really use that often. And so I kind of used the assets that I had from years and years ago that I bought because I'm an idiot. Of course, chucked all the assets I wanted into Unity, and of course now we're ready to begin. First thing I like to start off with is of course gameplay. Now you need some form of map to actually test the gameplay out, so I sort of created the starting part of the map, which is just a few rocks and some water. Very simple concept. This was just to get my look. I didn't want to make a game necessarily based on a fish out of water. It just so happened to turn out like that. Basically I just downloaded a few rocks because I knew in Getting Over It there are rocks, and of course I just added water because I thought it looked really cool in a nice kind of side-scroller 3D sort of scenario. So I threw all my assets together and kind of made a little map made out of rocks, water, and of course there was a boat that I thought looked very nice. I of course added a rigid body onto that boat so that it kind of had physics dynamics in there, and I knew that I was going to eventually end up using physics when I actually made the game, so threw everything I could at it to make it kind of physicalable. This of course basically includes adding mesh colliders to everything so that we have something to actually hit when we're going through our level. Very simple concept so far. Now I want to make the script for my gameplay, and obviously what I need to do is open up C# and mono develop, but I believe that Unity is no longer going to support mono develop after a certain date. I don't know when that date is, so very sorry to those guys out there like myself who actually really love mono develop. We're gonna have to use Visual Studio, the horror. I'm joking. Right, basically the core script is very simple. I used, of course, a rigid body on my main character, which was, at the time, it was the boat. So the boat only exists there because it originally had the control. I should have taken it out, but I didn't. But the boat was flopping around. It basically only had a rigid body on it, and of course a collider on it, because it needs a collider in order to function with the rigid body. Now, of course, it's time to write the script, and the script for this was so basic. It was basically rigid body dot add force. All you need to do now is create the vector 3 that actually supports where and which direction and all that type of stuff that the character is actually flowing. And of course the way I did this was to use the screen dot to world point from the main camera. Of course the input that you want is actually your mouse cursor position, but of course the mouse cursor only comes as a vector 2 because of course there's mouse position X and mouse position Y. We want a third kind of variable to represent our Z distance, which is the distance from the camera. The way I fixed this was basically setting the Z or Z position of the vector 3 to 10 because it was always 10 meters away from the camera. Very simple. Now we have a vector 3 that we can chuck into our screen dot to world point position kind of thing, and now we have a direction that our fish can actually jump towards. So far so easy. Now of course I refined the mechanic to play around with the different types of forces that we want to add to our object. Now of course you can use add explosive force and stuff like that, but it doesn't really matter what you use. It all does different stuff, but it all does the same stuff at the same time. Once that's all in, you want to be able to press your mouse at specific times so that the fish will jump towards certain areas. Well, in this case it was the boat, but it eventually becomes the fish. I don't think I need to go through that transition with you of how you make something from one to the other. Simply delete the script on one and move it to the other one. I make these videos for free. What more do you want from me? In order to make sure that the fish could only jump when it was touching something or touching some surface or area that I wanted it to touch, basically I just used something called void on collision state. Well, this means that every time you were collided with something, it would activate a boolean which would say true, which means we are touching something, or is grounded is what I called it in the actual script. And of course, if you are grounded, then you can jump wherever you want. If you're not grounded, however, you cannot jump at all, which is very good because it kind of makes the game very very hard. Proud to say I completed it about 50 times before releasing it to you guys, so it is very possible, and if you want to download that, I'll leave the link in the description right now, and we'll move on to the next part, which is the level design. Right, level design was fairly easy. I basically grabbed a whole bunch of assets, making sure that the plane that I want the fish to be able to move across is always at 0 on the Z axis. It was important for that because the fish always had to stay on 0, and of course the camera always had to stay on 10, and the camera was basically tracking the fish using a very similar function, which was basically this .transform position is equal to vector3.lerp. Basically, it's a way of smoothing out the transition. Instead of using vector3.move towards, you kind of move towards an object very chunkily, if I can use that, or frame ratey or glitchy. If you use vector3.lerp, then it lerps between one position and another position over a specific time, and it's got damping and all that type of stuff, which is really cool because then you get very smooth transitions whenever you move within your scene. So I tracked it using a separate game object. The camera was 10 meters away on the Z-axis from this game object, and of course the game object was being tracked to the actual position of the fish. Very simple. The camera was just a child component set 10 meters away from the actual fish. Simple. Of course, fill in the variables, our current position, our player's position or our fish's position, and of course how fast we want it to move from one to the other. It's quite funny how easy this game was to actually make. Of course, Bennett Foddy's version is kind of complex and really doesn't have any bugs or glitches that I can see, but you know, it's fun. Now that you have all the gameplay and of course you have your camera tracking, you can actually test out the level, so you can start building and start testing from different positions so that you can get a full level that actually works. Now when it came to level design, I used assets that told a story. The story is very simple. The inspiration behind it was actually Blue Planet 2. If you've ever seen that documentary series, then it is probably one of my favorite documentary series ever, and I would recommend that you end up watching it. I don't know if it's out on DVD yet. I don't know. Sorry, I meant Blu-ray or Netflix or something that you guys use nowadays. Very simple inspiration. After creating the level, I kind of thought, oh, see, you know, I've been watching a lot of Blue Planet and stuff like that, and so I realized that there's actually these fish that jump around. Now, this was the inspiration behind the actual gameplay at first, and of course, I just built it up upon there. And of course, Blue Planet 2's whole thing is pollution on the planet, which I'm not necessarily in support of saving or radical, what do you call it, environmentalist. But there are these fish that have kind of moved onto land and started living on land, and they kind of jump in that very similar style that you jump in the game. It's just madness. It's utter and complete madness. So the story is basically these pumps, or this industrial district is pumping stuff into the ocean, and of course this fish is like, hey, you can't do that, you know? It's my place. What is his solution? Well, his solution is to come out of the ocean and go up to the lever, which actually turns off all the pumps, which is the entire story. I mean, it's not very well told, but you can kind of tell by the environment that the pipes all lead down to the ocean, including in the tutorial stage, and even you can see a pipe in the main menu as well, I think. I'm not too sure if I actually added that in. You'll have to tell me, because I'm never playing that game again. It's frustrating. So you work your way out of the ocean, which kind of looks very pretty at first sight, and then you walk your way towards planks, you see a bit of nature, and then of course you start to see barrels, and you see other mechanical objects, and then all of a sudden you're given this human-made light, or light bulbs, or lamps and stuff like that, and you're even given the whole industrial kind of district look. There are pipes going everywhere. If you actually follow the pipes, they do lead to the very top for some of them and stuff, so I kind of wanted to give that feeling that you're working your way up these pipes. You start noticing trash chutes, all this type of stuff, and then you eventually get to this place and you see civilization. You see a house, a human house. Not that many other creatures actually make houses, but if you do, you know. So it's a human house. Amazingly simple concept, very fun to make, and of course it's a great way to tell a story through just the environment alone. Nothing is really given to you, you just kind of need to work it out, and there's probably a lot of you guys are going to go, oh no, there's no story here. Tater just tried to make a game that was very frustrating. And both of you will be right. Seriously, it's incredibly frustrating. Not something I necessarily want feedback for because, well, actually, yeah, give me feedback. Why not? I'm never going to touch the game again. This was made purely for the fun of making a game, unless, of course, it somehow gets 1,000 downloads overnight. So, yeah, you know, no hope there. Plus, I didn't make a lot of the assets, so it's kind of like, ah, you're praising me for someone else's work. Yay me. Let's move on to something more exciting. There, of course, was music in there, and the music itself is actually based off Blue Planet 2 as well. So Hans Zimmer and some other guys did the music for it. Some other guys, I feel like so disrespectful saying that. Of course, if you want to listen to the original soundtrack, there will be a link in the description for that, and of course there will also be a link to my music for that, and it sounds incredibly similar to a few of the tracks in there. A lot of the inspiration and a lot of the mixing and mastering was actually based on what they did for Blue Planet. I've watched a lot of the behind the scenes, and don't judge. Often I watch the behind the scenes more than the actual show itself. So my music was very, very similar to the actual soundtrack of that, and of course I was listening back and trying to make changes and stuff like that as I was going through, and of course I already released it to you guys, so about 1,000 of you guys have actually viewed it by now, and I'm very glad that I got a lot of support for that, and you guys really liked it, and I'm like, yes, this music thing could go well. Very, very, very simple, just FL Studio, a few orchestral plugins and just mucking around with that type of stuff. You guys are here for the game development side, you just download something else. In fact, you guys are free to use my music whenever you want. I don't mind. I will say that the music was the part of this project that I did enjoy the most. I spent about maybe a few hours making it, and I was very, very pleased with what I got. It was very simple. It kind of told the oceany kind of story. It also had some industrial sounds in there. It had a few like ooh sounds in there. And of course the stuff that I actually released to you guys, a lot of it wasn't used for the actual game, so feel free to use those tracks if you want something that nobody else uses. Next up we have sound effects. Sound effects were very, very easy. I just got a bottle, and of course I just made these and stuff like that for the fish slapping on things, and then of course I made plop plop with my mouth. It's incredibly easy, and I've actually done that with a previous game. I just chucked them in Audacity, clip them up into the parts that you kind of want, chuck them in Unity, make them play every single time we reach something else. So in scripting it's void on collision enter instead of on collision stay. On collision enter basically means that every time you hit something or every time you touch something for the first time inside the actual game, it's going to call that function, and of course every time we touch something you make a slappy sort of watery slappy sound a fish would make. Something like that, I don't know. It's always fun to get creative with sound effects. Of course there was one more sound effect that a lot of people won't be able to hear because the music kind of overpowers it, and that is the wind sound effect, which was basically done by me just breathing heavily. In Audacity you can breathe for a second and actually stretch it out to be about maybe 10 minutes if you like, but what it does was basically take that clip and kind of repeat stuff. It's called pulse stretch, and it really stretches it out, makes it sound ambient, makes it sound really, really awesome. It's the beauty of Foley. It's such a fun thing to do. Like, what would sound like this thing that you never hear? Slap of a fish you very rarely hear, although I do go fishing a lot. That sounds like water hitting things at a high frequency, so like something like that. Anyway, that was the sound. Next up is of course the image effects or post-processing, or those nice fine details that kind of make the scene come alive. First thing I did was the color grade. Color grade's very, very easy. I wanted to kind of mile the blue where everything else would show up as a sort of purpley orange as well, so that you get this dynamic of what's nature and what's not nature. This also naturally comes from the colors of the assets that I used, so that was another thing kind of adding to it. So the blue color actually worked very, very well, and of course the last thing I did was add a fog effect. Fog effects are awesome. You can basically cover up a lot of those detail mistakes in the background that you have. For example, you could see the outline of the water that I actually used, so I just used the fog effect to cover all of that up. Of course, it gives this nice mist, this nice haze of water vapor or humidity everywhere, and of course as you're climbing up and stuff, when the light starts to shine through that, it kind of gives this nice bloomy effect. It's really awesome to play around with, and it was of course not an image effect, it was actually the built-in lighting tab thing at the very bottom there. So it's built into Unity by default. Really awesome thing. Basically fiddled around with that until I got what I wanted. Oh my god, we are basically done. Now finally, and this is something that a lot of people probably don't get into often, but that is playtesting. I got pretty much family members that were visiting to playtest the game entirely, and of course they come down and just play. Absolutely none of them got past the levels. Is this a problem? This is a rage game. This is not a problem. If I can complete it 50 times, that means it's possible for people out there to complete it 50 times. The people I was actually playtesting with weren't gamers, weren't people who are actually speedrunners or even know how to play games necessarily that well. But it's really fun to playtest with people who can't do that, because then you can kind of see all the flaws in your actual game if you were marketing it to people who don't play games often. For example, if you're doing apps. Very handy. Anyway guys, that's it for me. Thank you very much for watching. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Hopefully it helps you out a little bit, and of course it's mainly inspiration. I don't really want to teach you guys how to make something exact. I want you guys to go and figure it out and learn it. I'm just giving you very, very broad broad details. Copying is not cool, ironically, because I was trying to copy Bennett Foddy's game. So to all the Game Jam submissions, thank you very much for going, and if you haven't submitted a game for the actual Game Jam, I really would love it if you guys go and help them out and vote on your favorite ones or give them feedback and stuff like that. It's really, really important for these guys to actually start growing, and I really want them to sort of spring out and shoot out. And if you really like a game or something, recommend it to your friends, all that type of stuff. Try and get them some votes so that we can figure out whose game was better and all that type of stuff so that we can get them on the show. So support your fellow game developers. Ain't that right, Ray? Morning. Game development's so intense, I'm sweating. Make sure you buy your Tater Games hoodies on tatergames.com, which is not up yet. There's a spider on my light. No!